what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Wednesday, October 25th, 2017, hump day, middle of the weekday, starting that long, slow glide down to Powwow on a Friday, and whatever is due in store for us, obviously coming up on the weekend before Halloween. So if you haven't gotten all your little treats ready for the extortionists who are going to come around to your homes in costume next week, you need to get that put together as well here. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is on our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phones when you call on in. And this is definitely a very interesting time in our history right now, where we are just seeing all these scandals break loose, and there we go. Seeing all these scandals break loose, and it's starting to come apart here. You've got the Uranium One scandal. I mean, that's been around since 2015. It's finally getting traction in the corporate media and in the public eye, and Congress is taking action. You have the Trump dossier, the Golden Shower dossier. That's falling apart. It's now come on out that was all bought and paid for by the Hillary campaign. You've got the elite pedophile scandal, which is currently still focused on Hollywood, but is starting to spread outward into Jeff Epstein and his network of pedophile connections, including former President Bill Clinton. And at this point, I can almost imagine the elites are ready to stage some kind of a false flag to just try and get out of this mess, because it's all closing in on them, and they're not able to contain this anymore. Now, as we reported yesterday, the story broke that this Trump dirty dossier was paid for by Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign and the Democratic National Committee. And they helped fund this infamous dossier alleging illicit ties between Donald Trump and Russia, and claiming that Russia had videotape of Donald Trump engaged in all kinds of nasty behavior with two hookers in a Moscow hotel room, which would have left the then president-elect at risk of blackmail. And the dossier also claimed Trump colluded with the Kremlin to swing the election in his favor. Now, a law firm representing the Clinton campaign and the DNC hired Fusion GPS, who in turn hired Christopher Steele, a former British intelligence officer known for his Russia expertise, to compile the dossier. And the deal is said to have started in spring of last year and lasted right up to Election Day. Now, prior to the Hillary and DNC takeover of this campaign, it was rumored there was an unnamed Republican, an anti-Trump Republican, who had actually initiated the whole thing. And suspicion is beginning to fall on John McCain, who admitted he was the one that took this file full of fake news to the FBI, which in turn spread it throughout the government. And, of course, now the question is being asked, were all these warrants, these FISA warrants against Donald Trump and his staff, were they collected on the basis of fraudulent information, which would render them illegal? So this thing is just spinning wildly out of control. We've had a year of Hillary Clinton's lies about the Golden Shower dossier, and apparently Hillary's lawyer is now under fire, because when he was interviewed in the New York Times, this lawyer, Mark Elias, vigorously denied any involvement in this, and unfortunately the paper trail has come on out saying, yeah, it was him. Clinton lawyer Mark Elias arranged for the campaign and the Democratic Party to pay this dirt-digging firm to produce the dossier. So more lies, more cover-up, more deception. And remember what Richard Nixon said, it's not the crime that gets you. It's not the crime that gets you. It is that cover-up. And that seems to be what is happening right now. All righty. Now, getting on to this, away from the dossier and back to the Russian investigation in general, it appears that everything the Democrats were trying to accuse Trump and the GOP of doing is what they themselves were doing. We know that Hillary, because of the Uranium One deal, was open to blackmail by the Russians. And it may have already happened, because remember, the FBI arrested 10 Russian spies inside the United States government. And Hillary worked very hard to get them quickly shipped back to Moscow. So obviously there was some collusion going on there to protect Russia. They're accusing Donald Trump of collusion with Russia. It was the Clintons who were colluding with Russia over the Uranium One deal. It's projection. They're looking at all the crimes they did and said, well, we're going to accuse Donald Trump of it. We're going to put the focus on him, and all will be well. No, didn't quite work out that way, did it? And you see all these people engaged in all of this nefarious behavior in the absolute sure and certain belief that Hillary Clinton was going to steal that White House last November. And they would all be safe from any kind of investigations because there'd be a president who would make sure that there were no investigations. Now, there's still a lot of very highly placed people in government who want these investigations to go nowhere because, as it turns out, it looks like a lot of people were getting a little piece of the action of this Uranium One deal. Not just Hillary Clinton. The vigorish was being spread out all over the place here. And a lot of those people who were part and parcel of that Uranium One deal are now in positions of control. They're in positions of investigation. They should be removed. We're going to do a shout-out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. So Congress is out there announcing new investigations. Chris Farrell is out there saying congressional hearings won't be enough for the uranium investigation. We're talking high crimes and misdemeanors here. We're talking about treason. If you look at the very hostile attitude taken by the U.S. government toward Russia, then the sale of 20% of America's uranium into Russian control really does amount to an act of treason. Now, it wasn't just the Rosatom people who were pouring the money into the Clinton Foundation. We now know that the executives at the Uranium One company itself, the Canadian firm, they were pouring money into the Clinton Foundation to make this deal go through. The uranium executives gave $31.3 million to the Clinton Foundation. A Russian bank paid $500,000 to Bill Clinton for a speech. The money's just pouring all over, and Hillary and her defenders are out there saying, well, it looks bad, but really, the Uranium One deal was in our national interest, and they just gave us the money because we're really sweet and wonderful people. That's basically it. Now, this still unnamed FBI informant has emails and video evidence of the Russian efforts to win the favor of the Clintons in the Uranium One deal. They had this evidence all the way back in 2009. Now, according to Senator Charles Grassley, this FBI confidential informant Now, despite this ongoing criminal investigation into officials working for subsidiaries of Rosatom, the Russian government entity seeking to acquire ownership of U.S. uranium, the Obama administration approved the deal. The Justice Department has reportedly threatened to prosecute the informant if he discloses details of his involvement in the investigation. So what's going on here? Why is our current Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, still blocking this informant? Well, it may be because he himself was a key figure in this Uranium One deal. Now, it may be that Jeff Sessions recused himself from the Russian investigation originally because of campaign conflicts. But it may be because he thought it would insulate him from having to divulge what he knew about Uranium One and the people who at the very least knew about the deal, some who approved the deal, including past and present members of the FBI, the Department of Justice, Special Counsel Robert Mueller's team. Jeff Sessions appears to be part of the Uranium One cover-up. And if he is, he needs to step down, and we need an Attorney General who's going to go ahead with prosecutions that need to happen. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Jeff in Toronto, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. How are you?
I'm fine.
I just want to thank you for taking my call. And I think a lot of people, initially when President Trump was inaugurated, were a little bit confused as to why he was placing certain people in certain positions in his cabinet, into the White House, and I think he was kind of manipulated a lot. So I think now that we're seeing, like everybody just mentioned, like Jeff Sessions and whatnot, are looked upon as maybe being, touched by this scandal. And my mother talked about it all the time when I was growing up about what happened to President Nixon. This is about 1,000 times worse.
Oh yeah, this is the worst scandal in American history. This
makes Richard Nixon look like a choir boy. It really does.
Yes.
And I'm not disparaging President Nixon or his family or anything like that. But back in the 70s, that was a thing. But now there's so much crookedness all around the world that I think that the public is just, there we go again. Like it's just a cesspool again, or Donald Trump said the swamp.
Yeah, it's the swamp.
But I was watching Tucker Carlson show the other day, and he had Sebastian Gorka on, and he's a very highly intelligent man, much like yourself, who really articulated the point drastically. Like it was just when you're guilty of something yourself, you throw it on your opponent, and that's what Hillary did. And nothing stuck. And I'm pretty sure after Donald got elected, she must have took some counsel saying, oh, my God, we're just going to keep throwing this at the fan until it sticks, or let's just hope it does. I'm not sure what goes through her mind because I don't like to think about what goes through Hillary's mind. But Donald is, I think, a much more sober person, and he just likes to let things play out. And I think the day is going to come quite soon where the dominoes are going to fall. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's a very, very tense situation here because we're talking about a large number of very powerful people within the government who are caught up in this corruption, and it's all linked into that Clinton Foundation, which in turn links to a lot of other corruptions, including that CIA-sanctioned gun and drug running all the way back to 1980s Arkansas under then Governor Bill Clinton. So there's a lot of people, including the CIA itself, who are right now scared of any further investigations. And that is enough arrayed power to represent a threat directly to the president.
Well,
I mean, remember when
nothing to do with Donald Trump.
Hang on a second.
People are dying today from Hillary.
Yeah, that's exactly my point.
Dying now.
You remember when Sicily was trying to free itself from the mafia? The mafia corruption had gotten so bad. I mean, basically the mafia were the government, and those few members of the government who weren't caught up in the mafia started to fight back, and it wound up with prosecutors literally being gunned down in the middle of the street in broad daylight. We could see that the same thing start to happen here, because that narcocracy has a lot of money and a lot of power. They have a great fear of going away to prison for a very, very long time. And so if anybody's monitoring this show on behalf of Donald Trump, and I'm pretty sure that they are, you tell that Secret Service, they better snap too, drink a lot of coffee, it's private detail as well. Right now, there are a lot of people who are thinking that all of these problems are going to go away, if Trump is no longer in the White House. And it may not be a direct assassination attempt. We know that next month on November 4th, supposedly Antifa is going to have their civil war to try and drive Trump out of the White House and Pence out of the White House. And oddly enough, it coincides with another one of these drills that simulate the failure of the U.S. electrical grid. So everybody's kind of a little nervous about that.
Like no one thinks about what's going to happen if they try to remove President Trump from office. It's called even I mentioned President Nixon earlier. There is a silent majority. Those people are just like they pay their taxes, they go to work every day, they work. They're too tired to complain sometimes. But if they do something like that against the President of the United States, Donald Trump, I don't think the establishment is prepared for what's going to happen. I really don't. Like Jeff the Flake, senator from Arizona, who just kind of reiterates that. The reason why he resigned is because everyone's going to not vote for him.
Yeah, he was already looking. He was already looking like a loser in the polls going into next year.
He is a loser. He is a loser, and so is John McCain, and so is Lindsey Graham, and all these other fake Republican conservatives who think that they understand the American public, but the American public voted for President Trump because he was different. And they want change, like real substantive conservative values to reappear in America. And every person who ostensibly said to the public, who was an elected official in very high power offices, that they were going to do this, have been boiled down to being a total phony. And that is why President Trump is getting more support. And of course the mainstream media is not going to report it because people happen to like the president. And they realize that this fake thing about these Russian hacks and all this stuff about President Trump is fake. And it's a nuclear missile going the other way. Hillary Clinton is the problem. Or the Clinton Foundation is the problem. The Democrats are the problem. They're throwing coal into the fire of phoniness to blow up this thing, which is fake. And they think that the American public is so stupid that they're not going to understand that this is a total whitewash. And the American public is not stupid. And they can see the forest for the trees, and they can understand that this is totally fake. And they're not just can understand it's fake, they're getting mad. And if they try, I'm telling you right now, Mike, remove the President of the United States, Donald Trump, it's going to light up.
I fear that you might be correct, but again, all they have to do is just start, murdering troublemakers at random and basically run the nation through a campaign of fear and terror, which we've seen happen to other nations that fall under the influence of the drug lords. I mean, all across South America, you see the same thing. You have to applaud the people. Can I make a? Hey, Jeff, can I make a comment without you cutting me off?
I'm sorry.
Okay, we can applaud the people in Colombia. We can applaud the people in Colombia, where they all knew the drug corruption had taken over their entire government, and they had the courage to stand up and put their president on trial for being involved with the drug lords. Now, unfortunately, he was acquitted, but at least they had the courage to try. The question we have before the board now is, are the American people sharing in that same courage? Are we ready to start confronting a government which is itself the biggest purveyor of illegal drugs in our society, along with a bunch of other crimes and corruptions that are going on? And the problem with just saying it's a Democratic issue and the Democratic self-destruct, no, it isn't. Both parties are neck deep in this. We've been getting reports from this anonymous FBI blogger saying that everybody inside the Beltway, on both sides of the aisle, they're involved with that Clinton Foundation up to their necks. They're using it for tax avoidance and a slush fund. They're all dirty with it. And keep discovering all these connections between James Comey and HSBC and Loretta Lynch and HSBC and drug money laundering, we begin to realize it really is a case of almost everybody inside Washington, D.C. being compromised by the narcocracy. And we know how drug lords react when they're threatened. We've seen it, again, all across South America. So this could really explode into a very ugly situation.
I just think that when you arise to the position of being President of the United States, such as Donald Trump is, and I think that's why people are a little bit curious or baffled as to why he's waiting so long for launching the attack, because Donald Trump is not stupid. Sometimes he says things that maybe I would not choose to say in situations, but he speaks from the heart, and I think that's why he got elected president. And everything that he just adumbrated earlier, completely right, 100%. I wouldn't disagree with one word that you just said. The swamp is thick, and it's on both sides, and it's on both wings of the eagle in the United States.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're right.
Paid for by everyone. And I criticized Jeff Flake earlier. He's going out blaming President Trump while he had the lowest approval rating of anyone.
Jeff, we're gonna have to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with another phone call after these few words. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go right back to the phones here. Kathleen in Paris, thank you for waiting so patiently. What's on your mind today? Kathleen?
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Yeah, there's a few seconds delay there, and I keep trying to get it just right. when I turned down my volume.
Okay.
So, yes, I guess I'm like you and that last guy. I'm just holding my breath, waiting for the next false flag, and how are they going to top Las Vegas and Mandalay Bay?
Well, especially since they cratered that one, nobody's buying that official story. I mean, they're desperate enough to set off a nuclear bomb and just say it was North Korea. The war is on. And, but that deep state, the problem with trying to deal with this particular cancerous tumor is it has metastasized across virtually the entire government. And what we're seeing brought to the surface with this uranium-1 deal is how many people are dirty with it, who are still in positions of power and influence, and how almost impossible it is for Trump to start getting rid of them, because he'll fire one person who's very clearly compromised, and he looks around, and everybody that's in front of him as a potential job replacement, they're all just as compromised. They really are all dirty. The entire town of Washington, D.C. has been corrupted by all this money coming out of the Clinton Foundation, the CIA's drug running, and kickbacks for war. It really is. It's a criminal government.
Yeah, and like who's going to do it? We're saying you're not prosecuting. Well, Sessions is compromised, and it's down to Trump has to take the authority to do it.
Well, Trump can't directly do it because of the way the executive branch is organized, but he needs to get an attorney general in there who's going to do the job, and Sessions is clearly not it. Apparently over on Alex Jones' show, Roger Stone just said Jeff Sessions is a deep state sellout, and he's working as hard as he can to keep the Clinton server emails from being released, and they're already saying it's going to be 2020 before they're going to be out. And it's pretty much obvious Sessions is just like his predecessor, Loretta Lynch, completely corrupted. And the same thing with the current head of the FBI. None of them are doing anything about these crimes. They are just as openly protective of Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation as their predecessors. And it's not because they like her. It's because they realize the scale of this scandal could delegitimize and discredit the entire government and bring it crashing down the way the Soviet Union did. And they all want to keep their high-paying jobs with all the perks and all the pleasures and the hot and cold running congressional interns that they can fondle. And so even Hillary's worst enemies are working to protect these scandals and try and pat them down. But I think they've got too much on their hand there between the dossier revelations, how Hillary bought and paid for all of that nonsense and was lied about that part of it. Then you've got the fact that there never was any provable connection between Trump and Russia, and now you have the uranium-1 deal showing that the real Russia collusion deal was with the Clintons, not with Trump at all. And a lot of people are saying, yeah, Hillary Clinton was just taking the crime she had committed and accusing Donald Trump of those same crimes. Psychiatrists call it projection. And in a more down-to-earth example, you'll see where there's a couple where, husband and wife, and one of them is fooling around, and the first thing they do is they accuse the other spouse, I think you're fooling around on me, as a way of, putting them on the defensive.
Yeah, I know that pretty well.
Oh, okay, well.
So, yeah, but it's like nobody's watching the kindergarten. Congressmen didn't even know that we got a war going on in Africa.
No, they didn't. I mean, Congress has abandoned its constitutional responsibility to oversee the wars. And there are not supposed to be any wars for a prolonged period without a congressional declaration of war.
You said that the best way to tell if there's tyrant is to make them act like one. But now that the deep state has come out of the shadows and just said, nah, we can do Las Vegas, and what you going to do about it?
Well, that's not exactly what they said. They said, Kathleen, stay on the line. I'm going to come back to you after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're talking with Kathleen in Paris. And Kathleen, I disagree with the idea that the deep state wanted to come on out into the light and say, ta-da, here we are, what are you going to do about it? The deep state and aristocracy, they're like vampires. Too much light, and they will start dissolving away. We, the independent media, are dragging them out of their slimy little pits and putting them on public display. And the shooting at the Mandalay Bay was a very crudely staged false flag, like we saw at Sandy Hook or Columbine or whatever, to try and push a disarmament agenda. And they botched this one very, very badly. And part of the reason they botched it is they came out with this absolute conviction that the American people will just swallow any ridiculous story given to them by the corporate media because, hey, that certainly worked with John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King, but it doesn't work that way anymore. And the people who are planning these things, they're a little slow on the uptake. They don't realize how dramatically the mindset of the American people has changed over the last decade. Americans are skeptical. They refuse to be naive. They're resistant to being fooled. They don't want to be made fools of in the eyes of the world. And so they are looking at the inconsistencies in the official story. And then everything that's done in a panic reaction to try and hide the inconsistencies only makes things look a lot worse. I mean, now the official story is back to how this security guard, Jesus Campos, I think, was now shot after the massacre began instead of in front. So the story keeps changing, trying to deal with all of the different inconsistencies that are coming out. And it's just reached the point where everybody is just throwing up their hands and saying, this isn't even worth paying attention to anymore. We know it's a false flag op. Okay, let's move on. We have other false flag ops that we need to be paying attention to.
Yeah.
Okay?
So we don't, it's a false flag, so no need to dig for the details of who really did it, I guess.
Well, we can take we can take a real guess at it, but the thing is, one of the things the government loves is when some cover-up isn't really working, is they try and trick everybody into arguing constantly over the fine details in order to waste all of our time and keep us distracted from other things that are going on. We're not going to fall for that anymore. An event happens, we get out our big rubber stamp, boom, obvious false flag, let's move on and look at the other things that are going on.
Like Africa.
Yes.
And my suggestion for the media went from mass media to corporate media, so maybe we should just start calling it the state media.
We could definitely do that, the state-run media. I mean, that's pretty obvious at this point. What we really did is we went from the idea of the mainstream media to corporate media because they arrogated the name mainstream to sort of sell this idea that they speak for the majority of Americans, and they don't. They really haven't for a long time. They speak for the corporations and they speak for the government. So the mainstream is now here on the Internet and the independent media. This is where real Americans are having these discussions about what the heck is going on. Okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot's going on over in Africa, Somalia.
Yeah, well, we're going to get into that a little later in the show. I need to let you go, Kathleen, because we've got a bunch of calls waiting their turn here. So thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch to Steve in Massachusetts. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I want to talk to you about Trump and everything that's been going on as far as Hillary and her allegations are finally coming out. If you remember a couple weeks ago, Trump came out with a statement saying this is the calm before the storm. And everyone's asking him, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? I think this is exactly what he means by that. All of a sudden, you see all these allegations coming to not only it's been going on on the internet media for a while, but now it's starting to go into the mainstream. And I think you see Hillary starting to get taken down. And if that happens, you're going to see a lot of other players going to go down with her.
Yes.
And I think that's what he meant.
Well,
and if you want to go even deeper, I think right after he made that statement as well, Harvey Weinstein went down as well. Now, you may not see the connection, but I think this has been going on in Hollywood for decades and decades and decades. And one way to take down the deep state is to take them down by the pedophilia that's been going on. It's been going on in politics. It's been going on in Hollywood. And I think if you start taking them down, first with the allegations of abuse on women, then let it trickle down to the pedophilia. Because you notice Corey Feldman came out with this a while back, and nothing was done.
Yes. No,
and,
I think it's entirely possible that Harvey Weinstein was thrown under the bus as a last desperate gasp to try and prevent the Uranium One story from gaining any more traction. Once Fox News started carrying it, they were going to have to deal with it. And as we reported on yesterday, WikiLeaks released one of John Podesta's emails from 2015 saying, this is out there now, and we've got to deal with it. So they knew this was a huge scandal all the way back in 2015. Except for Hillary Clinton, who's still out there saying, oh, it's baloney, it's baloney, it's baloney, it's politically motivated, pay no attention, let's go get Trump.
And, and I remember it was only a couple months ago, people were complaining that Trump was on the defensive and he needs to do something. I think this is what he's doing. I mean, call me an optimist, but it just seems like too coincidental that ever since he made that statement that you see a lot of things happening now.
I disagree. I disagree. If Trump were on the offensive, he would replace Sessions and he would fire Robert Mueller. They're clearly compromised. He needs to get some people in there who know how to do the job of prosecuting a case, who are not hooked in with this narcocracy. And he's probably going to have to go outside the Beltway to find them. You know, get Larry Klayman get Larry Klayman in there for goodness sake here.
But you know how the media is. You know how they'll spin things. It's like, oh, he's a madman. He's firing people left and right.
Nobody's paying attention to the corporate media anymore. That's the whole point.
Yeah, but that's true. But they're still going to try to spin it. And there are some people who do it.
Who cares? The corporate media can say whatever they want now. Hardly anybody is paying attention to them anymore. Which is true. They're faking their readership numbers with click bots to fool their advertisers. The corporate media has made itself irrelevant with lie after lie after lie after lie. The real mainstream is right here. And Donald Trump, he needs to take off the gloves and he needs to put on those brass knuckles, or in his case, gold knuckles.
Now, that would be a huge thing if we can take out the deep state's mouthpiece, which is the media. If we can do that, I mean, that's huge.
We've already done it.
Happening.
We've already done it.
It is happening.
We've already undermined their audience. Their audience numbers are absolutely terrible. Polls show the American people don't trust the corporate media. I think it's something like only 10% of America still thinks the corporate media is being straight with them. And the corporate media and the government have got massive, massive credibility problems of their own creation. And it's coming back to haunt them now.
Well, that's a sign of good things that are happening then. I mean,
I think so.
You know, what we're seeing now, plus what happened to the media, I think is a positive step in the right direction. And I hope it keeps going forward and in full force.
Well, we're going to have to push it, you know, because the other side, the deep state, the corporate media, they're pushing back as hard as they can. And so you can't just sit back and on your couch and watch it happen. Everybody needs to get decisively engaged in moving these stories forward. The Trump dossier revelations, the Uranium One deal, all of this stuff. You need to keep pushing it forward. All of you Rivero's Rangers, you need to stay on top of this. Steve, thanks a lot for the phone call. We're going to switch over here now to James in Atlanta. Aloha, James. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, I wanted to ask you about Bergdahl. If Trump hadn't been elected, do you think he still would have been prosecuted, or can you kind of go back over and explain that whole story for people that may not know everything about what's involved?
Well, why don't you give us the quick overview?
Mike, I'm not 100% familiar. I think he's charged with desert, and maybe some guys got killed looking for him.
Yes.
But I was just wondering why. It seemed like it was a couple of years back when he was brought back home. Why this is being done now, or why they waited? Or that was my point, was that if Trump hadn't gotten elected, is it possible that he might not have ever been charged?
I think he would have, because basically the story is, at first it was, he was a captive of the enemy, hero. Then they found out the only reason he was captured was he had deserted his team, and so it quickly switched around on him, and they charged him with desertion. And I think it would have been hit with that charge regardless of who was in the Oval Office.
But it's been some time since he has come back. Hasn't it been a couple of years?
I forget exactly how long. It's been a while, yes.
Roughly.
Yep.
They were talking about during the election. That's just kind of what, remember, Trump brought that up a couple of times during the election, I was just curious about that, Mike. Thanks, and I hope you have a great show.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go here. The phone lines are now open again. Getting on back to politics, here's something that has a lot of people scratching their heads, and this goes back to what I was saying about how there's this threat of an Antifa civil war on November 4th. Personally, I think it's going to fizzle, but what their stated intention is to have nationwide riots that will force Donald Trump and Mike Pence out of the White House. And apparently it overlaps with a national drill simulating a solar-caused collapse of the power grid. Always makes people nervous when they have these drills at the same time. So what is Hillary Clinton thinking? Because as it turns out, Hillary Clinton's campaign is still paying their top aides after the election is over. Normally when you run a campaign, when the campaign is over, win or lose, you let your people go. Not Hillary Clinton. She's been paying out top aides in total in excess of $300,000 since last November. And that does not include amounts being paid to close Clinton aides from Clinton campaign-supported PACs and a resistance PAC, which received a transfer of $800,000 from the Clinton campaign mid-2017. Still a lot of money floating around in there. Now, Clinton's confidant, Huma Abedin, served as vice chair of Clinton's campaign from mid-November 2016 through July 2017. She has received $67,000. Now, Hillary's out there saying she's not going to run for president, but she certainly acts like she's still trying to stay in the public eye with her book tour and all these celebrity shows going on. Is she actually still thinking that there is some way that she can get Trump and Pence out of the Oval Office and her inside? She's got the backing of the narcocracy. They don't want anybody in that Oval Office who might want to look too closely at what's been going on over at places like HSBC and the Department of State or anywhere. Apparently, remember there was another big stink that while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, she shut down a pedophile investigation at the State Department. And apparently the NBC has obtained documents relating to the investigation. State Department personnel, at least one ambassador, who routinely would evade his protective security detail in order to solicit sexual favors from prostitutes and minor children. And Hillary put the quash on that. It really is rotted all the way through beginning to end. Boy, the phone lines are loading up here again. Somebody did an interesting statistical analysis, this was over at governmentslaves.info, and found out that if you are friends of the Clintons, you are 5 times more likely to commit suicide, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more. Let's go back to the phones here. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I wanted to talk about the petrol but first, Bergdahl, he might have been like a CIA advisor. We don't know who this guy really is, so people got to keep that in mind. He might have not been a deserter. He could have been swapped with another, moderate rebel terror group, you know what I mean? So there's a lot we don't know about this guy, like Paddock, so people got to keep an open mind about that, Just because he deserted doesn't mean he's not part of a training group or something, so. Well,
I agree. We don't know. we really don't know. The issue here, though, is Occam's razor. I'm a firm believer. You look for the simplest explanation that fits all the facts, and generally you're going to have the correct one. And I note that there are a lot of people who will look at the available facts and they'll spin these very intricate, complicated theories that spread on out into the stratosphere, and they try and link it with HAARP and chemtrails and all the rest of it. No, keep it simple. The simpler your theory, the more likely it is to be the correct one.
And Mike, moving on to the Petro Yuan, I know the first contracts come up in 2 months. They start. Mike, it's going to be an interesting 2018, would you say?
I would say it's going to be a very interesting 2018. China is launching the Petro Yuan, direct competition for the U.S. petrodollar. And again, it is a hammer blow on the hegemonic domination of the U.S. Federal Reserve note. I can't imagine that Wall Street or Washington, D.C. are going to take this very, very lightly. There may be repercussions. There may be a trade war, which unfortunately they have a bad habit of turning into a real war, but we will see what happens.
Yeah, because Mike, if for every contract that gets done, that's basically a contract that's not going toward the U.S. for the petrodollar.
That's
so the more
exactly
contracts
right.
they get, every country is going to look and say, hey, U.S. dollars is backed by nothing. It's a bunch of, confetti. And the Petro Yuan's, it's backed by gold, but you don't have to, you can either take the yuan, buy Chinese-made products, or you can take the gold from the Shanghai Gold Exchange, or you can, the swap, right? They have a swap also, so you don't have to actually take the gold. You can use that and bet, bet for the price amount, right? I believe. I forgot what they call that. But there's 3 different steps you can choose, so you're not stuck with one thing like the petrodollar. They have a choice.
Well,
and that's a great thing.
Stay on the line. I'm going to come back to you after the commercials. I want to respond to that. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking with Dustin in New Jersey, and there's a fundamental reason why people are turning away from the U.S. dollar, petrodollar, toward the Russian ruble or the Chinese yuan or the Petro Yuan. And it's far more fundamental than what the currencies are backed with or what deals or credit default swaps may be offered in parallel with these contracts. It has to do with the fact that if you take a yuan or a ruble in trade, you can go back to Russia and China and you can actually buy things with it that you're going to want to buy. In the case of Russia, GMO-free agriculture. In the case of China, they are a manufacturing powerhouse. If you take a U.S. dollar in trade and you bring it to the U.S., what are you going to get for it? Our manufacturing has declined over the last 3 decades, and nobody wants our GMO agriculture. And so that is a major factor in deciding what currency that you want to use to do your trading in is ultimately what can you get for that currency. Not what it's backed by, but what can you get for it that you need for your economy. And the world was forced to use the U.S. dollar because of the Bretton Woods Agreement. And now they're turning away from it. And that's why the U.S. is in a panic to start all these wars all over the place, because without that Bretton Woods Agreement, without the rest of the world using U.S. dollars for global trade and banking, there's nothing else holding up our economy.
Yeah, and Mike, I think that was the futures market, the third step, if they wanted to put it into the futures market, I believe.
Okay.
Hey, Mike, people don't realize if you get petrodollars, like for oil for petro, basically you got to convert those dollars back into the currency of yours, right? Like if you wanted to bring it back. So basically you're getting less back, right?
Absolutely.
Because the U.S. dollar the U.S. dollar is worth more. So that's the scam. That's the scam.
Plus whoever's doing the conversion gets a piece of the action.
Yep, there's a middleman involved. There's 2 middlemen involved. So basically, they're skipping the middleman. So it's just going to be direct trade. It's like basically bartering. That's the best thing to do is bartering. And then if the U.S. don't like bartering, I mean, who is the U.S. or Britain to say I can't trade with you or you trade with me? That's none of their business. But,
I mean, that's the whole point of government exerting control, is saying, yes, we will tell you who you're going to do business with. You will not do business with Iran. You will do business with Israel. And again, I'm in agreement with you. For people engaged in any kind of personal commerce, they should be able to do business with whoever they want in whatever currency, whatever medium of exchange they want. And when you look at the front of that pretty printed piece of paper that passes for money here in the country, and it says right on the front, this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private, the word that is missing is only. This is not the only legal tender for all debts, public and private. Whatever two people agreed to trade, rocks, bitcoins, that's commerce. We'll be right back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2, and we're going to go right back to the phones here. Sherry in Fredericksburg, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, I think this is a time for calm now because, we have the ball in our court. And I just wanted to point that out. Like I said before, I think I think something could happen to Trump, but he'll be okay, I think. But I just don't want people to be out of control right now because this is what they'd love. This is what the establishment would love. And I wouldn't put it past some joker to say, oh, he's dead, breaking news. Just wait and see. No knee-jerk reaction here. I just want to say this for my own peace of mind. I think it's really a time for calm, and I don't think anything's going to happen to him. So if some goofus comes up and says something terrible like that, or if they put it on the TV or whatever, I just wait and get all the, another false flag maybe. But it's been such a long time coming. Just remember the power is on our side at this point. And I saw an article in the New York Times. Did you want to say anything, add anything to that?
Well, yeah, basically.
There was an...
Basically, I would like for everybody to stay calm. These are not calm times. We've got, wars bursting out all over the planet. They're talking about nukes. And as far as Donald Trump, I think right now that deep state, the narcocracy, that Gordian knot of corruption between the Clintons, the Bushes, the CIA, the drug running, the gun running, the selling off of the uranium, all of it, they're not calm. They're in a panic. They're feeling cornered and desperate, and that's why I think there really is a very real danger to President Trump, and I'm just hoping that his security detail understands that and takes the appropriate steps.
Yeah, me too. The New York Times, I saw an old article. It was 2012. And I think it was December, and it showed a photo of Hillary with her head wrapped in some kind of turban or something. And she was expected to be questioned by a Senate committee about Benghazi, and she had the flu. And I don't know, you were talking about this the other day, but I think you said 2013. I don't know if she'd had a concussion or what, but she had a really bad flu and felt terrible. And there were 2 senators that were going to testify for her, according to the Times. And I thought, December 2012, now this is how long things have been stalling around. And now it's coming time, and it's going to be, I just think everyone should stay calm, because I think he's going to be okay. I just want to say that up front.
Well, the price of peace is constant vigilance, and I think that certainly applies in this case. Again, looking at the history of other countries whose governments have been consumed by the drug lords, you realize it is not calm. It is very, very violent. If you look at the crimes these people have committed to attain their positions of wealth and power, knocking off a president, is not really that big a step upward for these people.
Right.
Okay,
right.
So
I wouldn't put
you can stay calm and I can stay calm.
Yeah.
But we can't pretend that that the deep state, that the narcocracy is not scared and possibly ready to strike out. Because right now,
they would love us to be out of control. Go on.
We're not the ones who are out of control, okay? And I agree with you. We don't want to see rioting in the streets of America, which is what Antifa is trying to do on November 4th. What I'm talking about is that this narcocracy, from their point of view, they're fighting for their continued wealth, power, survival, freedom, for their very lives in some cases. And they have all focused on Donald Trump as being their nemesis because he was never supposed to be in the Oval Office. It was supposed to be Hillary Clinton to make sure that the corruption could continue with protection from the Oval Office. Didn't work out that way. And that's why they've been in a panic about Donald Trump ever since he won that election.
Yeah, well, the power's on our side. You know, thank heavens for that. We probably will.
It's on our side only if we use it. And by that, I mean, again, the call to the Riveros Rangers. You grab all of these stories, you post them all over social media, you send them by email to your friends and family, you talk about them with people in the real world, because already we're seeing the corporate media, like Reddit, is just automatically scrubbing any story that relates to Uranium One. They're all circling the wagons, you know, to protect the Empress Hillary, and from their point of view, we're all the wild Indians out here on the plain trying to get on in on them.
Yeah, and that's what made them so transparent, is that they became so desperate.
Yes.
And thank heavens. Yeah. Chaos, right?
Okay.
So thank you for taking my call, Mike.
All right, Sherry, we're going to let you go. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, how you doing, Mike? Mike, I have this question. Why do you think everybody's panicking so much over the Uranium One, which is a bad scandal? But I think something like Benghazi, and I mean the real story about Benghazi, shipping weapons to some of the worst terrorists in the world, including and creating ISIS, and also overthrowing a legitimate government in Ukraine with literal Nazis. Everybody talks about Nazis and stuff, literally Nazis. I think these are worse scandals than Uranium One. I mean, obviously selling uranium to any other country is bad.
No, selling uranium to a country that has been demonized as our enemy by the same people who are doing the actual sale. See, the reason this is gaining traction is, for most Americans, what happened with the arms smuggling to ISIS and Al-Qaeda, they can sort of settle themselves down and say that maybe there was some ultimate purpose and reason for the U.S. government to do this. But when you're looking at what happened with Uranium One, that facade is gone. This is just Hillary and Bill and a bunch of their cronies getting together to just take this shell Canadian company, transfer ownership of 20% of America's uranium resources into this Canadian company, then facilitating the sale of that company into Russian hands. And anybody looking at that is going to say there's nothing there. There's no motive other than the money. It was just a way for all of them to get insanely rich, and they were taking in the money from all sides, from Rosatom, from the executives at the Canadian company itself. The money was just pouring all over the place, and I think people are latching onto this one because there is no illusion that this somehow, in some convoluted fashion, served the national interest.
The other thing I wanted to mention is people, when we talk about the media, what's called whatever you want to call it, the corporate media, mainstream media, government media, people need to watch out for false prophets. And what I'm talking about is basically Breitbart, which is pretty much just another version of Fox News. They do not cover certain stories. They're very careful in screening their callers. I really think people need to, they're not really alternate media. Now, InfoWars is absolutely alternate media. Alex Jones may be a little bit too much of, with Trump and all that, but if you look at his staff and you look at the two new shows that created with David Knight and Owen Schroyer, these people are right on everything. They're still continuing to try to find out what happened to the shooting in Vegas. They're definitely alternate media. But Breitbart, people need to watch out. I think they're phony. I think they're phony as a $3 bill. I don't know about Bannon himself. I mean, I think he's very busy now running around.
Mark, I don't want to get into a thing where we're dissing or praising other independent media here. We all have our different different opinions about Alex Jones and Breitbart, or for that matter, my show here. The point is, we all have to be our own best analysts. We shouldn't be trusting anybody in the media, whether it's Breitbart or InfoWars or even me. Everybody needs to learn to trust their own analytical powers, to look at the available facts, sift through the noise, and stay focused on what's going on. As I said earlier in the show, as far as I'm concerned, this whole thing in Las Vegas, it's been and gone. They're trying to keep it alive now. They've just arrested Stephen Paddock's brother for child porn, and they're smearing his family. But I think they're doing that in the hope that it is going to distract people from Uranium One and the Trump dossier scandals, because those right now are the biggest scandals happening in our current events, and the Uranium One scandal really is the biggest scandal in all of U.S. history, and yes, I do think it is considerably larger than the arms smuggling through Benghazi, because the U.S. has been smuggling arms to other countries all along. And as far as overthrowing other governments, the U.S. has been doing that repeatedly since the end of World War II. But the selling of 20% of our uranium ore to a nation that has been denounced publicly as our enemy, that really is a scandal, and we should stay focused on that.
Well, I agree with you. By the way, like I said, we have disagreements on a lot of things. I don't agree with you 100%. I don't agree with Alex Jones' InfoWars 100%, but I do pick and choose. But there's nobody, obviously there's nobody, people that just don't agree with each other 100%. But I smell rats in certain things, and that's why I mentioned what I mentioned, because there's something wrong there. They're just not alternate media. I'm sorry, that's just the way I feel. I'm not the only one feeling like that. I've looked on the net. There's comment sections and stuff like that, and I think there's a real problem there at Breitbart. I really do.
Well, some of these larger, more well-funded, independent media outlets, we don't use alternate media anymore because that's a negative connotation. When you start accepting funding from outside sources, you have to make some compromises. Alex Jones certainly did when he got his initial round of funding by getting up there on YouTube and saying that he was always going to be a supporter of Israel no matter what. So that's the compromises that the more well-funded operations make. Anyway, Mark, we're going to let you go. The phone lines are really, really loaded up here, and we're going to switch over to Joe. First of all, we're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network, and then we're going to go to Joe in Oklahoma. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Two things, Michael. Appreciate your program and what you do. Two issues. A couple of days ago, the overnight CBS News, the commentator was talking about these 4 soldiers that got killed in Niger. And, give me a break. And why are they trying to change the pronunciation of this country's name? I'm 69 years old, and when I started out in grade school, it was Niger. Lindsey Graham's the only one I've heard call it Niger. Anyway, the other thing is, too, yesterday you were talking about the alternative energy and some of the scams and one thing and another. Harold Hamm, who's a native Oklahoman, he's the head of Continental Resources, was on a Sunday morning talk program in Oklahoma City. And, of course, they were trying to pit him against the wind energy business here in Oklahoma, and our good legislature down in Oklahoma City gave them a 3-5-year tax abatement on anything they built, and consequently they was making the oil industry and everybody else put the bill for all they were doing. But Ham said that in Oklahoma, the oil and gas industry is valued at $77 billion currently. In addition to that, he said, and I think I got the number right on this, he said the wind energy business assets are valued at $670+ billion, almost tenfold.
Well, I would be very suspicious of that accounting, and we have to go back and remember how Enron claimed it was worth all of this huge amounts of money until they went bust. They were using an accounting technique called mark-to-market. And I say that because there's all these other articles saying that these wind projects aren't penciling out. they're not producing enough electricity to really be competitive with other modes of electricity.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
In my opinion, Harold Hammond isn't one of the nicest guys on the block. But this wind energy deal, people in town think it's great. But if you have one of those things sitting across the road from you going whoosh, 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 all night long with the red light flashing in your bedroom window, they'd have second thoughts about it. Especially when the subsidies, they are getting so much subsidy, it's incredible. Just absolutely incredible. And that's, keep on doing what you're doing, hang in there, stay vigilant, and keep the powder dry.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here, and then we're going to switch over to Dean in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How's it going? I just wanted to start by saying I really enjoyed all the insight from the gentleman from Arkansas who had his experiences with the Clintons and the Walmart. I'd love to see him put that into an article. I think that we're on the verge of a lot of people ready to hear more on the next wave of the Clinton scandals, so I'd like to see that. But I wanted to start by saying there's been a big rift of people in the Bay Area going crazy over the rental costs because the average 2-bedroom apartment in Oakland and San Francisco is between $2,400 and $2,600. And anytime someone gets a rent increase now, the social justice warriors are posting flyers all over their neighborhood of their landlords, telling them to harass them, to email them, to visit them, and to address their white privilege. I was wondering what you thought about that.
I'm getting really sick and tired of this white privilege thing. It's basically we're being set up for a Zimbabwe-style eviction of all whites from the property. And it's kind of interesting to see how these two groups are brought into conflict, where the politicians are saying, well, look how well they live. You deserve this. Well, we all get what we work for. And in regards to the migration thing, Europe is the way Europe is because the Europeans made it that way. The Middle East is the way the Middle East is because the Middle Easterners made it that way. Africa is the way Africa is because the Africans made it that way. It's not like anybody was oppressing them, going on down to Africa and saying you're not allowed to build, these wonderful buildings or industrial bases. It's just how it all happened. But now with the politics of racial division, they're out there saying, well, you all have an equal right to all of these things, even though they were created by somebody else. And it's those gosh darn white people who are denying you your due. And this has led to where we are now seeing the start of random violence directed against white people, like that 56-year-old white teacher was just gunned down in Chicago. And what do they call it? The knockout game, where blacks are just running up to white people in public and just knocking them down. I mean, that's a very, very dangerous trend in our society.
Did they ever follow up with those black people that took advantage of the mentally handicapped white kid and made him say that he hated Trump and all of that? Did that ever go to trial, or was it ever followed up with that hate crime? Remember that?
It was a hate crime, and I know the kids were arrested, but I don't know what ultimately happened to them because, again, for stories like that, we're at the mercy of the corporate media, and the corporate media doesn't want the American people thinking about this kind of thing.
So the main thing I wanted your feedback on real quick was, with everyone in the Bay Area complaining about housing costs, my theory is that since we have a higher per capita compared to other states of illegal immigrants, and then it goes without saying unskilled workers, there's a huge demand put on low-cost housing and affordable housing. But at the same time, I think that the Bay Area specifically has higher per capita of legal immigrants coming for engineering, software, et cetera. I think that puts a bigger demand on the more expensive real estate for the 1-bedroom, 2 bedrooms, and small houses, and as a result, that's bringing up the median cost, especially for the Oaklands and San Franciscos, within this bubble of real estate.
I think you just hit the word
for these people.
You just hit the word. It's another bubble, just like we saw back in 2008, where there's a lot of flipping of these rental properties. In 2008, it was primary homes, and today it's rental properties are being flipped back and forth. And it's driving up the price of acquisition, which in turn drives up the rents. And there's going to be another collapse just like we had back in 2008.
Well, I think the average liberal in the Bay Area, if you ask them how much immigration should we have for illegal immigration, they'll all tell you unlimited. I've never heard a liberal tell me there should be a cap on it. They all say we should let as many people in who want to come here. That is the average answer here.
Dean, got to let you go. Sorry, got to do a commercial break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And before we take some more phone calls here, I'm going to fit some actual news in here. Trump, understandably, is ripping Hillary Clinton's campaign for their role in this Russian dossier, the Golden Shower dossier, and pointing out that the Democrats, Hillary Clinton's campaign, and the DNC paid nearly $6 million for what turned out to be a phony dossier that John McCain then handed to the FBI to pump into the intelligence agencies and try and destroy Trump that way. Well, it's getting even better. The FEC has filed a complaint. Actually, the Campaign Legal Center filed a complaint with the Federal Election Commission saying that the DNC and Hillary broke election law by not disclosing that they funded this Trump-Russia dossier. So the legal actions are already beginning against them. And all of the scandals are starting to come back up. You know, not just the dossier, not just the uranium, not just the email server scandal, but Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the Iwan brothers, that IT scandal where they're running an espionage ring. The email server, was that being used for espionage by Hillary Clinton? The murder of Seth Rich, all of this stuff is now coming on up, and we have to keep pushing that out there to the American people. All right, we're going to go back to the phones. Laura in Michigan. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. RT has been running interviews with the man who wrote the book, Barry and the Boys.
Yes.
Top sticker, talking about all the narcotics, you know, and about George Bush W. and Ollie North. And I can't believe how dirty they were.
Oh, yeah.
He said they actually, he said Barry Seal was teaching DEA agents to fly, so they could fly planes from Colombia to America with the cocaine. It's unbelievable. And what makes me mad is a couple weeks ago there was a Value of Voters. Bernie Perkins put that on Value of Voters in Washington. And they had Ollie North, and they were, oh, here's the hero, Ollie North. Everybody's cheering for him, you know. What a wonderful guy. Nobody knows how dirty he was.
Oh, he was very, very dirty. And during that whole gun and drug running operation, he knew what was going on. He knew Barry Seal was bringing cocaine back into the country, and he was okay with it because that's what they were using to fund this operation. They couldn't get the money from Congress because this Nicaragua supply was an illegal intervention. It violated the Boland Amendment and the Logan Act.
This author said the sad thing is, I think there's just as much cocaine coming in today as there was back then.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That's not a good note.
I mean, have you noticed that most of the drug enforcement activity in this country are against drugs you can either grow on your own or make on your own, like marijuana and meth? And they're still kind of turning a blind eye to cocaine. Now, obviously, heroin has become a problem because of the synthetics, which are taking over the street supply, and some of those are very, very dangerous.
I've always called Bill and Hillary Ahab and Jezebel. So I'm waiting for Jezebel to fall out of a window and off of a wall, and the dogs to eat her body, like in the Bible.
Yeah, I remember the story about it in the Bible, but again, I think the reason why Bill and Hill and the Bushes and everybody is still alive is they all understand the principle of a dead man switch, and they all have many of them already in place. And that's what makes them untouchable. I think the single critical mistake that Vincent Foster made was his dead man switch was in his White House office safe where the people who were behind his murder could get at it.
I would just suggest to everybody get that Big Boys by Hop Sticker. And I think that'd be a great book for people to read and pass on to everyone so they understand what's actually going on. And how dare Bush talk about Trump, how dirty he was, you know, how dirty Bush was. he's got nothing to say about Trump.
Yeah, I mean, the Bushes are dirty with this. I mean, the Bush and Clinton family were sort of working together in partnership, and they were in opposite parties, but the idea was they were just going to hand the White House off back and forth generation after generation. Clinton, Bush, Bush, Clinton, Clinton, Bush. Obama got in on them. Then it was going to be Hillary's turn, and then Trump came on in and just spoiled everything, and that's why they're all crying and kicking and rolling around on the ground. All right, Laura, we're going to let you go. We'll be back with more phone calls after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to go right back to the phones here. Kevin in West Virginia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mr. Mike. How's Bizarro World treating you today?
It's certainly bizarro today, and I think it's going to get a lot more bizarro in the immediate future as all this stuff starts to come on out.
Well, yeah, I have a few questions, and then I wanted to go somewhere else with this with you, but I don't understand how Mueller can investigate himself. That's like Hitler investigating the Nuremberg trials. I mean, this guy was the bag man and, had the uranium on the tarmac, giving it to the Russians. I mean, how in the world can he investigate himself?
Well, he's got the permission of the Attorney General saying, yes, he's a man of integrity. And, and I even there's even a report that Trey Gowdy is saying he's got top confidence in Mueller. But then in Washington, D.C., everybody's always talking nice about each other. It's part of the rules until it really starts falling apart, and then they all bail. But, yeah, first of all, I mean, this entire government should not be investigating itself for the exact same reason. They're all dirty with this. They're all dirty with the uranium one money. They're all dirty with the land snatch money. They're all dirty with the drug running money. They're all dirty with the gun running money. They're all dirty with military-industrial complex kickback money, the Clinton Foundation slush fund. And, yeah.
Do you see this coming down?
Say again?
Do you see this coming down? Do you see this, I always hear you say Soviet-style collapse. I don't think you could put Humpty Dumpty back together again on this.
I don't think you can. And that's why it's important for the American that's why it's important for the American people to understand what's going on, and that's why it's important for the Riveros Rangers to get on out there and just keep this in front of everybody's eyes, because the corporate media is ignoring it. I think CNN's given a total of 4 minutes since the story broke. They're not going to get it from corporate media.
Yes.
They're going to get it from the independent media. We have to put it on out there, talk about it with our friends and family, and say, look what's going on here. And forget what the corporate media is saying, and forget what Hillary Clinton is saying. These are all the same people who told you Saddam had nuclear weapons. This is what really went down. This is the worst scandal in U.S. history, and we need to keep pushing it forward until there is a resolution.
I mean, even if there's a resolution, this is going to be the downfall of the United States government. But how can we, as independent people, or people on, that listen to independent media, can we have a contingency plan, like our own COG, for when this does come down, and actually have people in place, not to put the pieces back together again, but so we can have a functioning government?
Well, that certainly would be a really good idea, and again, the model I like to use is the collapse of the former Soviet Union, where it took them about 4 months to really get the Russian republics put together and up and running. And if anybody wants to have a plan ready to go who is not a carpetbagger, because I can guarantee you there'll be plenty of those. If the U.S. federal government collapses, there are going to be all kinds of opportunities saying, we'll just restart it all over again, or we'll reset the private central bank and everything will go back to as it was before, ignoring that what the American people don't want is for things to go on as they have been before. That was the whole reason why Trump got elected. We want something different here. So I think there are going to be lots of opportunists and lots of hoaxsters and scammers who are going to try and hijack a collapse and reformation of this nation, and we just have to be prepared to give them a nice coating of tar and feathers and run them out of town on a redwood rail.
I totally agree, and I hope this doesn't go violent. I hope it doesn't, but I foresee that it will.
Well, again, the wild card is just how effective Antifa is going to be on their November 4th tantrum, where they're going to wail about how unfair the election was last year and how their candidate should have been in the Oval Office and they were cheated by Russia and betrayed by the American women, and that whole book list of excuses that she's out there settling right now. Anything else, Kevin?
No, you have a great day and keep up what you're doing, and hopefully we can fix this later down the road when this does fall.
Well, we're putting a lot of thought into it. We have our little blueprint for the new America that we're still trying to work on in our copious free time. Thank you for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Joel in Wisconsin. Aloha, Joel. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Considering that they've been investigating this Trump-Russia collusion for probably around 9 months, and now they find out that the information that was based on was fraudulent, and they even know who paid for it. Could the American people start a class action lawsuit to recover some of the taxpayer money that was spent to investigate that whole fiasco?
Well, I would certainly like to see that, but I imagine that there's probably some kind of immunity laws saying that, hey, we're only human, we make mistakes. I'll tell you what you need to do is you need to get, at the next election, we need to get an overwhelming grassroots movement to vote out all these people who took part in this thing, like Nancy Pelosi, who was at the forefront of Trump-Russia collusion. We're going to get Trump, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And even now she's been forced to admit on TV that following one of the most intensive and expensive investigations in U.S. history, there was nothing there that linked Trump to Russia. All of the links are between Russia and the Clinton campaign machine.
Well, that's a good idea, but like Senator McCain was involved, and he's probably not been elected for the last 16 years, So if you depend on the elections, we're just yourself in the head.
This is why Donald Trump's Commission on Election Integrity needs to start actually doing their job, because I've heard it from all kinds of people in Arizona. They don't understand how it is John McCain keeps getting reelected because they don't know anybody who's voting for him. And we know our elections are incredibly crooked. So far, there have been over 1,100 documented cases of election fraud, massive election fraud, in last year's election, all of it favoring Hillary Clinton. And nobody's doing anything about that either. And if Hillary Clinton and her corrupt machine comes crashing down, I'm hoping one of the ancillary damages will be that there will be a shakeup in our election system. Because we have to get that. We have to get honest elections back, or we are headed to a bloody revolution. And I absolutely wish to avoid that.
Okay, that's all I got. I don't think we're ever going to get Hillary, but we could maybe get her attorney and Mueller and some smaller fish like that.
Well, I'm a little more ambitious. I want the Clintons. The Clintons destroyed my life back in 1994, and it's payback time, as far as I'm concerned. Thank you for the phone call.
I don't think you're going to...
All right, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go and switch over to Steve in California. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you fine.
Okay. I'm glad about McCain because I don't know anybody that supports him either. But my topic was a little bit back. Last year in September, I went to Munich. I know you worked there for a while.
Yes.
And our plane came in. I came in on an American Airlines plane. And we got off the plane and went to get our processing, but they held us up. And we could see through the glass wall. And they had a whole room full of Muslims there. And before they were processed, there was a man who looked like a Jewish rabbi and his wife. He was a shorter guy, and he wasn't dressed in black like the Muslims were. And he had a yarmulke on, and official either from the airport or from the airline came and got him stamped first. And then the Muslims were processed one by one. It took a little over an hour before we could get to get our passport stamped. And after I was thinking about the whole thing, and I thought, well, since Turkey and Israel were backing ISIS, I would say that these people that were being brought in, apparently by this Jewish rabbi or official, they must be also ISIS. And maybe what they're trying to do is bring in problems into Europe so that the Jews of Europe will want to eventually immigrate back to Israel.
Well, that's no.
In other words, they would be.
It's no secret that Israel wants all the world's Jews to come to Israel to deal with what's called the demographic crisis. But they're having a hard time about it because of all the violence and the illegal activity by Israel's government. Israel's a very, very dangerous place now. And there was that campaign a few years back where Israel tried to entice Iran's Jews to move to Israel, and the Iranian Jews said, no, we're happy here. We've got friends. Nobody bothers us. One of the world's oldest continuously operating synagogues is in Iran. Nobody bothers them there, contrary to the propaganda about Iran being the new Nazi Germany and wanting a new Holocaust. And so that kind of failed miserably. So, and then of course there was that other story about Jonathan Pollard, who stole U.S. nuclear secrets and sold them to Israel. Israel in turn traded them to our arch nemesis of the day, the Soviet Union, in exchange for increased immigration quotas for Russian Jews to come to Israel. So that's been a long time agenda. And yes, Israel does like to profit when there are terror attacks or supposed attacks against Jews in other countries. It does encourage more migration. Now, whether that's what you saw or not, that's kind of up in the air. Anyway, listen, Steve.
Well, that's kind of. Well, I was just going to say I agree with you, and I thought trying to cause trouble in the European countries would make the Jews there worry more than they would be in Israel. Would make them more likely to want to go there. Oh, and another thing, you had a caller. I know you don't like to talk about UFOs. There was the guy that was trying to say something about German flying discs. I did hear a report from this colonel, a retired Air Force colonel, who said they brought back 20 flying discs from the Czech area.
All right, Steve, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. They never quit, do they? They never quit. All right, so let's get on back to the politics. Phone lines are open right now. Over in Syria, the U.S.-backed forces are seizing more of the oil fields in Deir ez-Zor province. Real motives and real purposes are now fully on display. The U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces are grabbing the oil fields as fast as they can, and at this point, the only rationale for grabbing the oil fields is that the U.S. does not intend handing them back to the Syrian government control. And so that is still going on over there. Now, according to The Intercept, they just released a new declassified NSA document. Actually, it wasn't declassified. It was some of the material leaked by Edward Snowden. And it turned out that Saudi Arabia ordered an attack on Damascus International Airport with U.S. knowledge. And this goes back to the early years of this war. So this so-called Syrian opposition was under the command of foreign governments right from day one. There never was a real domestic opposition. It was ginned up to mask a foreign invasion. Israel is now threatening military escalation with neighboring Syria. And what we've been seeing over the last couple of months, couple of years actually, since 2011, Israel has attacked Syria at least 20 times. And it's always involved, there was an errant artillery shell, came over the fence, it hit some dirt, and we have to fight back. We know what the real agenda is. Syria is already out there at the UN saying that Israel is staging these to justify aggressions, just like Israel stages these fake rocket attacks from Gaza so they can go on in and bomb them out every 2 to 3 years. Israel wants that Golan Heights. They don't want to give it back. They're already selling the oil and gas there. Meanwhile, Israel has approved 176 new settler homes in Jerusalem and in the Arab area of Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, which Israel now claims but is not internationally recognized. Remember, the original United Nations partition plan for Jerusalem divided it into 4 different sectors. There's the Christian section, the Arab section, the Jewish section, and there's the 4th section, I think, is Orthodox. But Israel wants it all. And it is illegal for them to be building these homes on Arab land. Now, getting on over to Iran, Iran has taken the position that there is going to be no bargain or negotiation allowed on Iran's military defenses, meaning its missiles. They made the deal over the nuclear weapons. It turned out to be a raw deal from Iran's point of view. Iran kept all their commitments. The U.S. has not. The U.S. is just throwing more and more sanctions on there, and now they're increasing their demand, saying, well, you've got to get rid of your missiles. Because when we invade you, we don't want any inconvenience. We don't want any trouble here. And everybody understands that's exactly what's going on. Article coming out of Russia today saying, despite the comment made a few days ago about how the U.S. was willing to unilaterally go up against Iran, and we can do this without Europe, the reality is that the Trump administration is on a collision course with its European allies over the Iran nuclear deal. Washington, D.C. is essentially demanding the European Union join in backdoor sanctions against Iran or face financial penalties from the U.S. In other words, you're going to help us gang up on Iran, or we're going to gang up on you. In other words, diplomacy by browbeating, arm twisting, and bribery. Now, the European countries think the Iran nuclear deal is just fine. The majority of the American people think the Iran nuclear deal is just fine. It's just Benjamin Netanyahu and the war hawks who want it to go away, so the door is open to an eventual invasion of Iran. Not by themselves, by your kids, of course. And they won't pay for it. You will. You see how it all begins to operate. Now, interestingly enough, as you know, up in Afghanistan, we've been there for 16 years. We're not doing very well. They're sending in more soldiers, and they're not really accomplishing more than anything. So basically, Eric Prince has come forward saying that he can provide a contractor force of 6,000 soldiers, for much less than the government would spend. I'd sure like to see that happen. But the only good news would be that if it botches up, they'll blame Eric Prince for it rather than for Donald Trump. Now, the Air Force caused a really big stink the other day when they said they were going to start recalling these former pilots to active duty status. And it ruffled a few feathers. More about that when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, last Friday, the Pentagon announced that an order had been signed that would bring back as many as 1,000 retired Air Force pilots would be brought back for 3 years. And it's something that military people understand and non-military people don't. Even after your term of service with the military is over, you're still perpetually on a hook where you can be recalled to active duty. And so they sent out this announcement, basically broadcasting they have a shortage of qualified pilots. And a lot of people are all of a sudden very, very nervous. So they're going to start recalling other veterans back to active service. People who've got their own lives established. They can't just drop what they're doing and go on back. So there was a bit of a backlash there, and it may be a harbinger of the flashback that will happen when they announce a draft. But now the Air Force is saying it isn't 1,000, it's only going to be about 200, and they're only going to work as instructors and in certain rated staff positions. But the issue is a lot of people are wondering about, we've got family who are in the Navy, family who are in the Army. These are people who have their own families now. They got homes, they got mortgages, they got businesses. What happens when somebody hits the panic button in wartime and they're recalled to active duty? It's an ugly situation here. This should alarm a lot of people. This is in the Washington Times. The Pentagon says that the country should stick with mandatory registration for a military draft and advocates a requirement for women to sign up for the first time in the nation's history. The recommendations are contained in a Defense Department report to Congress that serves as a starting point for a commission examining military, national, and public service. Congress ordered this Pentagon report, and the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness completed it in the early months of the Trump administration. Currently, only male citizens and residents aged 18 to 25 are required to register. which basically brings 2 million people onto the draft rolls every year. Women, whom the government has never ordered to sign it before, would add 11 million to the selective service system in short order. Now, the draft registration is definitely out there. The draft is not in operation at this time. But this ought to make people sit up and take notice. This is getting real. War is on the way, unless we find some way to stop it. And the best way to stop it is to use these emerging scandals of the federal government to just grind everything to a screeching halt, bring it all to an end. Because when you get past all that propaganda that's out there on the media, it is the U.S. that is inciting and starting all these wars and coups d'etats and drone strikes. The very best thing that could happen to the entire planet Earth right now is the collapse of the U.S. federal government. We'll be back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open. And let's get back on into it here right now. U.S. lawmakers seek to vote to abandon the Saudi-led war in Yemen. Now, the reason the U.S. appears to have gone into Yemen is twofold. There was what was termed a successful intervention several years ago, where the U.S. went on in, kicked out the legitimate government of Yemen, and imposed puppet rule. And the people of Yemen don't like being under puppet rule any more than the people of the United States do. And so they kicked out their puppet rulers and set up a new government of their own. So the U.S. had to go on in and give them what for, because once you are conquered by the empire, you don't break free. But they had to use Saudi Arabia as a proxy because the American people are just sick and fed up with all these wars. And they would be asking this really silly question, why are we going back into Yemen over and over and over again, just like why are we going back into Afghanistan over and over and over? Why are we going back into Iraq over and over and over again? Well, apparently some House lawmakers really think it's a war too far. So California Democratic Representative Ro Khanna, who's pushing for the vote, says he's in negotiations with Democratic and Republican leadership about whether the resolution is privileged under the War Powers Act and would therefore get an automatic fast-tracked floor vote. So there are members of Congress who really do think this country is involved in way too many wars. We're extended way too far militarily. And that makes it less and less likely that we're going to prevent. We're already losing in Syria. We're losing in Afghanistan. The U.S. is still in those countries only so they can pretend we haven't really lost. We may not be winning, but we are not losing. Interesting story out of 12160 info. Somebody leaked a document from NATO saying that they know they can't actually counter a Russian invasion into Eastern Europe, because Russia has many, many more tanks. We know that U.S. and NATO have been pouring tanks onto that border, but the reality is Russia has a lot more. And the fact that Russia hasn't come across that border, I think, tells us that this idea of an imminent Russian threat is about as real as Saddam's nuclear weapons. It's just a U.S. that's desperate for war to try and, if not save the economy, at least give them something to blame for it, and to try and drag the world back to Bretton Woods. Now, speaking of Russia, over in Kiev, there's been a car explosion. 1 man was killed and 3 others injured in a car bomb in central Kiev. And apparently, a member of the parliament and his driver are among the victims. So, looks like the wet work is starting over there in Kiev as well. Down in Myanmar, which used to be called Burma, there is a crisis there involving the country's treatment of its Rohingya Muslim minority in Rakhine State. It has reached the point where the U.S. is now withdrawing their military assistance and saying that Myanmar's military leadership has to be held accountable for its crackdown on the Muslim minority, saying that the U.S. was very concerned about this. Now, Israel's taking exactly the opposite position. Israel is selling advanced weapons to Myanmar during this anti-Rohingya ethnic cleansing campaign. A little bit at odds there. Now, China and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations plan to deepen their military relations and will go ahead with a joint maritime exercise proposed by Beijing, according to a statement from Singapore's Defense Ministry, and a sign of greater engagement between the 10-member bloc and the region's leading economic power. So everybody's choosing sides, choosing team members. Ahead of Donald Trump's expected Asian trip next month, the U.S. has now moved a third carrier group to the Western Pacific near the Korean Peninsula. So we have the USS Nimitz, the USS Theodore Roosevelt, together with the USS Ronald Reagan, are all positioned to make a move on North Korea when the order comes on down. Meanwhile, Air Force F-35s are coming to Japan in November. They're going to be making their operational debut in the Asia-Pacific region with 12 A models set to arrive at Kadena Air Base, Japan, for a 6-month deployment. And this is going to be interesting because, as usual with a press release from the Defense Department, they're talking about the Joint Warfighter Unprecedented Global Precision Attack Capability, blah, 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 blah. But we know that plane has a lot of problems, especially the A model. There are a lot of people out there saying the A model will never, ever really be suitable for combat. Its role is going to be as a training aircraft only. But the lesson of the F-35, the lesson of the F-22, the lesson of the Zumwalt, the Gerald R. Ford, the Independence-class littoral combat ships, the Freedom-class littoral combat ships. The lesson is very obvious. Just because you're spending more money than all these other countries doesn't necessarily give you a military advantage if that money is spent wastefully and foolishly. And they're already talking about how both the Independence and Freedom-class littoral combat ships are going to be taken out of service because they don't work very well, and they're going to have to come up with a new littoral combat vessel. Because, heck, it's not their money they're spending. We're going to do a shout-out to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Very interesting article over here in rare.us. Gearing up for nuclear war is not a way to prevent a nuclear war. I know that was the conventional thinking after Russia got the bomb from the Rosenbergs, and it was called mutually assured destruction. We're all going to have so many bombs we can obliterate each other, and nobody will dare make a move. And nobody did, thankfully. But back during the Cold War, the United States kept nuclear-armed bombers on 24-hour ready alert in case our conflict with the Soviet Union ever turned hot. Actually, it was more than that. That was the era of the fail-safe zones, where they kept the bombers in the air at these fail-safe points way out beyond our borders. And the bombers would fly out and they'd circle around, and then when the time was over, they'd come on back in, and another set of bombers would replace them. But now the Air Force is ready to put nuclear-armed bombers on 24-hour ready alert. And it's caused a little bit of an issue because the Air Force hasn't used alert pads since the Cold War. And so now they're having to go back and sort of rebuild these things, which is it's not just the hangar for the bomber, but the crews are literally housed right there next to the aircraft. So they got to have these little barracks and living quarters. They're having to scramble to build all of those things as well. And all of this, of course, the military-industrial complex, they're making money hand over fist on all of this stuff here. All right, let's grab ourselves a phone call. Dallas in Austin, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Dallas, are you there?
We lost him, Mike.
Okay, we lost him. All right, fine. Now, we've been talking about what's been going on over in Niger, the 4 U.S. soldiers who were ambushed and killed. And the French are saying it would have been worse if we had not been there. But it came as a shock to a lot of Americans and even Congress that the U.S. has about 1,000 troops in Niger. And they're asking, what the heck is going on? Well, obviously, Niger has a lot of undeveloped resources that U.S. companies would like access to. But it also turns out U.S. officials are now acknowledging Niger is the hub for U.S. operations in Western Africa. And so that begs the question of just how many troops we have in Western Africa and in which countries. Have we already invaded and conquered half the place without telling anybody about it? I mean, that's what AFRICOM was created for, a single unified command for U.S. military force projection into Africa. And now we're finding out that while we were busy watching the NFL football players kneel, that we have wars going on in Africa. And we still don't know how many nations are involved. Now, over in the Philippines, boy, talk about a foreign policy whoopsie. Philippines used to be good friends with the United States of America. And then Obama goes down there and chastises Duterte for taking a very aggressive approach against drug crime in the Philippines. And Duterte takes the attitude of, this is our country, this is a problem, we're going to deal with it. And Obama says, you can't. You have to love your drug criminals and treat them kindly and gently. And so Obama comes back home, and the next thing you know, there is ISIS showing up in the Philippines. Oh, my goodness, ISIS in the Philippines. The U.S. may have to intervene. And fortunately, the Philippine Army made short work of these ISIS, and they've kicked them all out. So now the U.S. has lost its excuse for military intervention, and now, to show just the folly of this short-sighted foreign policy decision, Duterte personally receives weapons shipment from Russia and tours a Russian destroyer. Philippines has now pivoted away from the United States and to Russia because of the very rude intrusion by Obama into the nation's handling of the drug criminals. Okay, I understand Dallas from Austin is now back on the line. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I apologize for taking you off topic, Mike, but the VW scandal is kind of ridiculous because they have a VW diesel that'll run for 100 miles per gallon in Germany, but it's illegal to sell in our country.
Well, that's because of the emission laws, and you need to understand that there are different measures of gallons around the world, so it's a little misleading because what we call a gallon here is a different volume than what they call a gallon in other parts of the world. But mostly it was banned in this country because of the emissions issue. And when Volkswagen did bring these diesel cars over here that were claimed to meet the emissions, the U.S. government said, fine, come on in here and we'll give tax incentives to people to buy these alternative fuel cars. And then a couple of years down the road, they find out that VW cheated. They programmed the onboard computer of the car to tell the difference from when it was being tested for emissions and when it was actually out on the road. And it would do one set of engine settings when it was being tested for emissions, and then when people got out on the road, the computer would basically light the engine up for better performance and violated the air pollution standards, and that's where that whole stink came from.
So my question to you, sir, do you think that without the emission controls that the diesel engine would have worked better in Germany and get that 100-mile fuel?
Well, the diesel engine is actually a very good idea. I mean, the guy who originally invented it, Rudolf Diesel, he designed it to run on any kind of available plant oil, including hemp oil. And he got funding from the Roosevelt, not the Roosevelts. I'm blanking on the name. Rockefellers. Got funding from the Rockefellers to build a factory to make...
I've actually put vegetable fuel in a diesel engine.
Yes,
and got it
will
like
work.
2 or 3 miles down the road.
Yeah, well, today's diesel engines are designed to work specifically with a diesel fuel, but that's not the original design that Rudolf Diesel had. His engine was to run on just about anything you could put in there, and that made it very attractive to people who were concerned about gas and oil prices even back then. So he got funding to build his factory, and then all of a sudden he's sailing across the ocean to talk about selling these diesels as a wartime product, and he just accidentally falls off the ship and drowns and is never seen again. And then the Rockefellers basically now owned that factory making the diesel engines, and they made a deal to provide these engines only as long as the engines were fed a specific fuel over which the Rockefellers had some financial involvement with. And that's why today's diesel engines don't come up to the original design, which would burn anything including hemp oil. All right, well, listen, Dallas, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here.
Thank you.
Getting on over to Iran. Iran has now sentenced a captured Mossad agent to death over the assassination of several nuclear scientists in Iran. And apparently at least 4 nuclear scientists between 2010 and 2012 were assassinated. These were key players in Tehran's nuclear program. And according to Amnesty International, the arrested Mossad agent, Ahmadreza Jalali, is an Iranian doctor who studied and taught in Sweden, but he was co-opted by Israel, and he's been sentenced to death in Iran on espionage charges. And yes, Israel loves to do that. They love to go out and they love to kill scientists who are doing great work in other countries because Israel wants to be the greatest scientific nation on earth, no matter how many of other nations' scientists they have to kill. Now, for some reason, Canada is getting on board the bash Russia wagon, as it were. And apparently they're not paying attention to the revelations here in the United States about how there never was anything to the Trump-Russia collusion, how this whole PP-Gate dossier was a fabrication created out of thin air by the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC. But apparently the president of the National Olympic Committee of Canada, Tricia Smith, is urging the International Olympic Committee to impose sanctions against Russia, to suspend Russian athletes from international competitions, regardless of the outcome of 2 ongoing investigations of IOC commissions. See, there have been all these accusations in recent months about Russia is doping their athletes, and Russia's doing this, and Russia's doing that, and Russia's cheating. And the IOC said, all right, we agree to investigate. And so now Canada is saying, don't wait for the investigations to be over. We don't need to know the facts. You just sanction them and get them out now. So let's talk about the economic news here. Speaking of Canada, half of Canadians admit that they cannot afford the basic expenses. Real estate has just bubbled up there, and the Canadians are struggling, paycheck to paycheck to paycheck. That's a bad sign. Now, we already talked about this earlier in the program, and that's China's launch of a petro-yuan in 2 months. And it is basically a death blow for the dollar's dominance. I'm sure the dollar will still be out there, but basically now the dollar has to compete. The petrodollar is now in competition with the petro-yuan, and my odds are favoring the petro-yuan for reasons I've already said before. The yuan is backed in part by gold. More importantly, more fundamentally, you can take the yuan back to China and get stuff with it that you actually want. China is a manufacturing powerhouse. The U.S. has lost its manufacturing preeminence over the last 3 decades. We can't. Our once greatest manufactured product, our military machines, they're junk, overpriced junk. People are going to take the yuan because they know they can get something for it. They're going to avoid taking the dollar because what are they going to get if they come to the United States with the dollar? Overpriced manufactured junk and GMO agriculture. Such a deal. Now, a while ago we were talking about, basically a year ago now, the Indian government began a demonetization project, a cashless project. They declared the 2 largest denomination bills invalid, which basically abolished over 80% of circulating cash by value. And this caused commotion, outrage, all kinds of harm. India's economy suffered because of this. And what is now coming on out, according to this article in Global Research, India did this at the behest of the government in Washington, D.C. That Washington, D.C. is pushing this cashless agenda, and India was going to be the first place that we're going to set it up, and it's going to work wonderfully. Cashless is going to be great. We get to spy on everybody. We get to track their spending, and even more important, they can't ever do a run on our good friends, the banks. No matter how badly they mess up, they will have to leave their money in the banks because it's really the bank's money. You slaves are not allowed to have your own money. You do the work, we'll manage the money for you, buy you what you need, and you're supposed to sit there and not ask any questions. It's how it worked on the antebellum mansions. None of those slaves ever saw a penny of the money their labor produced. It was all held by massa and managed for them. That's what they're heading for in this country. We'll be right back. America, welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the phones here. Emmerich in Vancouver, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Listen, I just wanted to mention something about the Jetta, the diesel engines. Even at the worst, it's still better than the North American best. Like, if you drive behind a Ford pickup, a lot of times you got to back off because of the stink.
Yes.
That never happens behind a Jetta. So, even though, like I say, they cheated, which is wrong to do, but at their worst, they're still the best in the Ford.
Well, again, the thing is that they did cheat, and that, unfortunately, that was a conscious decision. Was to have a car that appeared to...
I agree.
A car that appeared to meet the emission restrictions, but still had the zip and pep the drivers wanted. Now, as far as the stink coming out of the Ford car, oftentimes that's the result of whatever additives may be in the specific diesel fuel that they're using. But again, Claire and I are talking about, we're at the point where we have to get a newer car. Our old one, it's 17, 18 years old now, and it's definitely on its last legs. And we may look at a diesel, or we may see if we can afford to get one of the earlier hybrids and something like that. I don't have a problem with diesels. I don't even have a problem with Volkswagens. My very first car was a Volkswagen Beetle, and I loved that car. And I put a lot of work into it. When I bought it, it had 4 different colored fenders, and I repainted it, and I rebuilt the engine, and I was very, very happy with that car. And then this Chevy came across the divider on Azusa Highway and murdered my car. And fortunately, I survived the crash. I was flinchy on crosswalks for about 6 months after. So, no, I have very positive memory. And I like the new incarnation of the Beetle. They've captured the feel of it. While it's clearly a new car, but it does remind you of what those old Beetles looked like.
It would be just interesting to see the actual emissions, that come out of the tailpipe of that international engine on a Ford versus a Jetta.
Well, I'm sure that
scientific.
The problem is, I'm sure that data is out there somewhere. The problem is the data for the Jetta isn't reliable because of the cheating. They're going to have to, at some point, somebody's going to have to actually figure out a way to find out what the real emissions are by measuring them while the car is being driven as if it was normal. Or they may have already done that, and that was part of the process that led to the forced recall of all those vehicles. But again, your problem is with Volkswagen's corporate management, which made this conscious decision to have the computer run the engine one way when it was being emission tested and then switch it into a different way when it was being driven. That was definitely a very conscious decision to do.
I understand that 100%.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
I agree 100%.
All right, we got to let you go. Thank you very much. We're going to switch over to Tom in Florida. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, good day, Michael. First off, I don't know about too much about the cars, but you go to a truck, look at the Hemis on the Dodge. They have they're 8-cylinder. They actually run on 4 when they up on open road. So a Hemi engine's still probably the best engine you can buy as far as a Dodge pickup truck. I think they're top of the line over all the other trucks, believe it or not. People don't talk about that. They still have a cast iron block where everybody else is using aluminum. But Michael, that's not where I called you. Michael, you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Yeah, the reason I called you is I don't know if you saw the news today, but you saw now that they did a survey where 55% of white Americans feel like they're being discriminated.
Yes, I did see that.
And white America's it's all over the news, and they reported on OAN, and now people are waking up that we're letting all these the asphalt's telling the gasoline what to do here. You're bringing all these people in here, and now they're discriminating against you who's been here for 100, 200 years in this country. White Europeans are getting discriminated against these minority groups. Something's wrong with this equation here, Michael.
Well, there was
picture ain't adding up here when you got 55% of the American whites feeling they're being discriminated, like here in South Florida, for example.
Well, there was another article that came on out where they've done a survey and discovered that right now 44% of the population of California does not use English in their homes or their local communities. They only use English when they have to. So, yeah, something is seriously wrong. Tom, I got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercial.
They flooded that state, Michael. They flooded that state with all these Ronald Reagan came out of that state. Think about it.
All right. Got to let you go. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. And going on back to the Uranium One scandal and the dossier scandal, it turns out the lawyer who just got outed as the conduit between the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC and Fusion GPS, Mark Elias, is also the lawyer who was defending Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the DNC from the class action lawsuit filed by Bernie Sanders supporters, where they went on in and said that they had been defrauded because they donated money to the Democrats to support Bernie Sanders, only to have the Democratic National Committee throw the nomination to Hillary Clinton. So they're feeling defrauded. They want their money back. And Elias basically went into court and said, well, look, they should have just known it's up to us to pick the candidate, not them. Well, if so, why are you even having primary elections? So that lawsuit is still out there. And it's absolutely valid. You can't stand there and say the Central Committee will decide the candidate. At the same time, you're having all these primary elections around the country, many of which are being rigged. Getting on back to the economic news, there is an iconic store in Manhattan, Lord & Taylor. They've been there since 1826. And they are one of the stores that is very famous for their large front window displays during the holidays. When you look back at those old movies about, Christmas in New York and people are walking by and there's all these amazing store displays, that was Lord & Taylor. Well, unfortunately, Lord & Taylor is having to sell that flagship Manhattan store to Workshare office space company WeWork for $850 million. But the deal allows them to continue to use those front windows for displays for the next 2 years. So the image will still be there. But it's another indication that retail is not doing well. It's not doing well at all. A little bit of trivia. Do you know where the idea of an electric model train came from? We all had them as a kid. I had a Lionel. It was originally something that was built for one of those Lord & Taylor display windows. It was just a little train model on a track with power supplied, and it was just driving around as part of the decoration of a snowy winter scene. And all of a sudden, all the kids are running in saying, where do we buy that? Where do we buy that? And that's where that whole model railroading thing came from. Now, down in Bermuda, there has been another breach of a law firm, which is causing panic among the ultra-rich. Bermuda-based Appleby has admitted it suffered the breach. It happened last year. They're just admitting it now. But basically, they're looking at possible Panama Papers-style expose into tax evasion by the super rich. Now, Appleby denies any allegations of tax evasion or other wrongdoing by itself or its clients. Somebody needs to hack into that Clinton Foundation and find out all that data. It's amazing how secure the computers at the Clinton Foundation are compared to Hillary's email server. Hillary's email server had worse security than Ashley Madison. A little bit of good news. A U.S. judge is not going to block the Trump administration's decision to halt Obamacare subsidy payments to insurance companies. And this, of course, is going to make those insurance companies very upset because they never made the money off of Obamacare they thought they were going to. It was a failed policy. The only people who are still trying to keep it going are those who are thinking of the legacy of Obama, because Obamacare has Obama's name on it. That's the reason to keep it going. Or those who are financially tangled up in those exchanges. But it was never about the health of the American people. It was never about affordable health of the American people. It was an absolute disaster, and it destroyed a lot of lives. Over in Germany, apparently the local media there are describing the Eberplatz region of Cologne is a no-go zone due to the violent migrant youth gangs that are just basically running amok down there. So Germany is now getting no-go zones, along with much of Europe. How's that open borders thing working out for you here? Meanwhile, here in the United States of America, Politico is reporting that GOP senators are trying to assemble a cheap labor amnesty for young illegals, which will not protect American workers from unscrupulous employers, nor reduce the huge annual inflow of migrants and workers. This is from Politico. They're bringing in these immigrants as cheap manual labor that will accept less money than the American workers. Here's where it all falls apart. You still have to pay for those unemployed Americans. One way or the other, you got to support them. 2, the less you're paying your workers, the less they're going to have to come into the store and buy the products that you are selling. And in the case of these illegals, many of them are taking any money that they don't need to live on and sending it back to their family and home. It's a huge drain of cash on this country. Whoever thinks up these ideas, they never seem to think them all the way through. Meanwhile, Russian television is reporting that hundreds of thousands of Africans are being held in horrible conditions awaiting shipment to Europe via a network of pro-immigration non-governmental organizations and human traffickers. And the EU has only itself to blame for this next tsunami of refugees about to storm their shores. But I'm sure it makes George Soros happy. And as long as George Soros is happy, we should all be happy, right? We all must just think in terms of what pleases the billionaires. Well, things in Spain have obviously reached a crisis point. Catalonia is saying because of the actions of Madrid, they have no option but to declare themselves an independent republic from Spain. Spain, in exchange, appears to be getting ready to militarily invade Catalonia and give them what for. So there's going to be a lot of blood spilt over there. Personally, my sympathies are with the Catalonians. Now, over in Iraq, the Kurds are taking a little bit more mature approach. They are proposing that they will set aside the independence referendum as long as Iraq will agree to a dialogue regarding more autonomy for the region. I think Baghdad would be well advised to go along with this plan. Because after all, Iraq has suffered so much military abuse. Going back to the first Iraq war. I think it's time that country had a little peace and quiet. Now, Russia is expressing surprise over a British lawmaker's initiative to investigate Russia's possible use of social media to influence the Brexit referendum and June's general election. Russia's just become the scapegoat for every failed political move. Oh, we didn't get the election. It's Russia's fault. You know, Brexit succeeded, had to be Russia's fault. My hair is falling out, has to be Russia's fault. It's amazing. Okay. Not that I want to spend a lot of time in Las Vegas, but here's the latest dirt here. When Stephen Paddock, or whoever it was, launched that shooting, and then they breached the room, and Paddock was there, supposedly dead of a suicide. There was a laptop. So far, so good. Oh, good. We've got his laptop. We'll get all kinds of information about what went on. No, they won't. Somebody removed the hard drive from the laptop. And I don't think it was Stephen Paddock, because if he'd removed the hard drive from the laptop, there wouldn't have been much reason to take it up to the hotel room, would there? So somewhere along the chain of evidence, somebody got in there, and depending upon the model of the laptop, it can be very easy to remove the hard drive. But for whatever, it is now gone, and with it, all of the information about why Paddock may have been up there, how he was lured up there. And that, to me, screams that, yes, there's a cover-up here. There's a cover-up. Now, here's a very unhappy story. This is from Global Research out in Canada. And it's basically talking about the ever deadlier police state and pointing out that none of the reforms, increased training, diversity programs, community outreach, body cameras has had any effect on America's deadly police assault, especially against poor people of color. Police forces in the United States, which according to the Washington Post have fatally shot 782 people this year, are unaccountable, militarized monstrosities that spread fear and terror in poor communities. By comparison, police in England and Wales killed 62 people in the 27 years between the start of 1990 and the end of 2016. And in many cases, these killings in the United States are not, in fact, justified. Police have become rogue predators in impoverished communities. Under the U.S. civil forfeiture laws, police indiscriminately seize money, real estate, automobiles, and other assets. In many cities, traffic, parking, and other fines are little more than legalized extortion that funds local governments and turns jails into debtor prisons. Meanwhile, our Attorney General Jeff Sessions says civil asset forfeiture is a key tool for law enforcement. Well, there's a big steaming pile of bovine excrement. We know that's not true because the vast majority of people from whom property is being seized are innocent of any crime. They have not had their day in court. The police will just see a pile of wealth there and they'll grab it saying, we suspect you may have been used this for drug dealing. You have to prove that you weren't. And because taking a case to court can mean years and years before you get your property back, the police will do a little sidle up to the person and dig in the ribs and say, look, we'll cut you a deal. We'll cut you a deal. Make a nice little deal for you. Okay, we can be reasonable. If you promise not to sue us, we'll give you back a piece of what you had before. And most people, unfortunately, are going for it because they don't have the option of waiting all those years. It's a racket. It is a racket. Right now, the American police are murdering more innocent Americans than all the mass shooters that are being wagged at you. Now, down in Guantanamo, October 11th, there were three attorneys, Rick Kamen, Rosa Eliadis, and Mary Spears. They all quit their jobs as lawyers for the man accused of orchestrating the al-Qaeda attack on the USS Cole, which may have been another Israeli false flag. And they obtained permission to do so from the Chief Defense Counsel, Marine Brigadier General John Baker, who found good cause for their resignations. They cited a cascading ethical conflict over a lack of confidence in the confidentiality of their privileged conversations with Abd al-Rahim al-Nashiri at Guantanamo. The details are classified. But the case judge, Air Force Colonel Vance Spath, wrote in an October 16th order that while Baker purported to find good cause to approve their leaving the case, Spath as judge has not. Accordingly, Mr. Kamen, Ms. Eliadis, and Ms. Spears remain counsel of record at this case. So there's something going on down there. And again, there is reason to suspect that the USS Cole was another false flag attack. Oh, those gosh darn Al-Qaedas. Gotta hate them. Gotta hate them. Turning closer to home, over in Oklahoma, Republican Senator Ralph Shorty of Oklahoma City has been charged with engaging in child prostitution, transporting a minor for prostitution, and engaging in prostitution within 1,000 feet of a church. And they've issued a warrant for his arrest. And apparently this goes back to an incident where this Republican senator was found in a motel room in Moore, Oklahoma, with an underage teenage boy. So, they are all slime balls, aren't they? From the area of political correctness, this is getting a little bit out there. Over in Shimer College, there's an instructor, Dr. Adam Kotzko, and basically is saying that all white people should commit mass suicide. And he comes on out and apparently is responding to the revelation that only 1.5% of white people own slaves in the antebellum South. And he's out there saying, whether or not your individual ancestors owned slave, you as a white person have benefited from slavery and are complicit in it. And he's basically saying all white people should kill themselves. Well, Mr. Kotzko, I would like to point out my ancestors ran a station on the Underground Railroad, helping escaped slaves to freedom at great personal risk to themselves from the slave catchers. Because New Hampshire law at that time did not support the Underground Railroad. New Hampshire law was that while slavery was illegal within the state, that escaped slaves, when captured in New Hampshire, were still considered the property of their owners in the South, and they would be sent back. So when you paint with a wide brush like that, you're going to get a lot more splatter. Speaking of wide brushes and splatter, remember Michael Moore decided he was going to have his one-man anti-Trump Broadway show. It's been a huge flop, box office disaster, negative reviews. But that's not going to stop him from taking it out on the road. It's a road show now. Salon had an article, the 25 conservatives actually worth following on Twitter. And to nobody's surprise, all 25 are anti-Trump conservatives. I think we're seeing the deep state really start to crank on up. I think they're taking the position, if they don't get rid of Donald Trump, all these investigations, sooner or later, there's going to be a crack, and it's all going to come on out. So again, for anybody monitoring the show on behalf of the president, you tell his security to be alert, drink a lot of coffee, don't assume anything. I mean, after all, they let that protester with the Russian flags get past security to Trump in the Capitol building. You can't allow mistakes like that. It only takes one mistake, and history changes. Apparently, the fourth Amazon Studios executive has just left the company in 1 month. And apparently this is a fallout again of more of this sexual abuse in entertainment. So it's really rocking and rolling. All right, we got to take a break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our show after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Fox News is now reporting something we reported yesterday. ISIS is losing ground in Iraq and Syria. And so it's all but over there. And it's going to leave the United States with a bit of a problem because a few years ago, especially in Syria, the reason for the U.S. to be there mutated. It went away from Assad as gassing his own people because nobody could prove it. And even now the U.S. is admitting it was actually the opposition that was using the chemical weapons. And they said, but we're staying in there, we're fighting ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Well, when ISIS and Al-Qaeda are gone from Syria, the U.S. has no business being there. They have no business being there anyway. Syria didn't ask for their help. The UN hasn't given them a resolution to go on in there. Congress hasn't given them a declaration of war. And I don't think they're going to get it. Congress is very angry that all of a sudden we got a bunch of wars going on in Western Africa that nobody bothered to tell them about. And the same thing in Iraq. Once ISIS is gone, there's no reason for the U.S. to be there. And the Prime Minister of Iraq is already saying, it's time for the U.S. to go home. Now, I'm sure the U.S. is going to stand up there and pose and preen and say, we are victorious against ISIS. But everybody understands what's going on. In that larger scheme of the dollarification of the Middle East, as revealed by General Wesley Clark all those years ago, these are failures. These are defeats. The U.S. has lost Syria. It's losing Iraq. It's losing in Afghanistan. This whole agenda is coming apart. All right, we got a few minutes. Let's talk about some stuff involving computers. The Bad Rabbit ransomware apparently is not spreading as fast as some people thought it might be. It's still a problem. It's mostly hitting companies in Russia, Ukraine, some in Germany and Turkey. But they're saying it's not going to be quite the problem that Malia was a year ago. Meanwhile, Kaspersky has come on out and said that they figured out what happened with this latest leak of NSA cyber warfare tools. where apparently this NSA staffer took home top-secret U.S. government spyware, and he installed a backdoored key generator for a pirated copy of Microsoft Office on his PC, and that's what exposed these confidential cyber weapons on the computer to outside hackers. So NSA likes to blame hackers, Russians, blah, 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 blah. No, it's their own people who aren't following the security rules. Now, we're getting a little bit of a warning from the Register in Great Britain. Apparently, iOS can turn on your camera on your device, your smartphone, your tablet, without any warning or notification. This is coming from Felix Krause, the founder of Fastlane Tools. And he said the way Apple software handles camera access and recording is leaving many people vulnerable to being spied on by apps on their gadgets without any indication it's going on. So it really is out of control. Of course, if you're really that worried about it, just stick a piece of tape over the lens here. Scientists now have a plan to halt global warming by dimming the sun. It's going to put a little knob in the sky, turn the knob down, the sun gets dimmer. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. Stay tuned for John Stadtmiller's program. He's got a lot of stuff to share with you. You, please take what you've learned here, share it with everybody that you know. We'll be back tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Aloha, America.